Okay, we are now live on Facebook. So thanks everybody so much for being here, and we'll get going momentarily as more people file in. Oh, great. We have our friends from Boulder at the Rocky Mountain Institute on board too. Welcome you all. And let's see, maybe just some interesting things to sometimes at these events, I just sort of update everybody on what else is going on. There's quite a lot happening in the world of transportation in over the next week. In Texas, the Austin region is going to get to see TxDOT's proposals for I-35 through the Center of Austin on August 10th. And we'll actually talk about how we hope some of what we'll talk about today might influence TxDOT's thinking about that freeway project. But we'll get to find out on the 10th. But there will be a big public comment period, and everyone in the Austin region should certainly get involved and make their voices heard on I-35. Statewide, there's the TxDOT Unified Transportation Program is in public comment right now, and the public's asked to comment on all the big projects that TxDOT has. So that includes things like I-35 in Austin or I-10 in El Paso, where they're proposing to widen the freeway and take out a huge section of a existing neighborhood and existing historic buildings. And then the I-45 project, which has been very controversial in Houston, is one of the things that's up for discussion. And so there's a lot of groups across the state trying to move towards a more sustainable, equitable, safe, multimodal future for Texas. And commenting on this UTP is a great way to be involved in progress in Texas transportation. So maybe I'll ask Scott, if you, sometime while we're doing this, if you want to post just a link to the UTP main public comment page. So if anybody wants to jump on that, we suggest you get involved and have your voice heard. Is that all it seems there's so many things happening right now. Also, in Austin, the Project Connect project is out for public comment right now. And so if you're in Austin, definitely, and you haven't already, Google Project Connect, and that should take you to the virtual open house for the Project Connect light rail and Metro Rapid projects, and make your voice heard on that. And finally, we are having, one of our programs is Vision Zero Texas, and we work for the state and for cities and counties and metropolitan planning organizations in Texas to work to end traffic deaths across the state. And the state of Texas, or TxDOT, has adopted a goal to end traffic deaths by 2050 and cut them in half by 2035. And most of the large cities have now adopted Vision Zero and are working on this a system safety approach. But there's a lot more cities, and Texas has 243 more counties and 950 more cities and 22 more MPOs that need to adopt Vision Zero and need to make a regular part of business of government is ending traffic deaths and making sure that our transportation system isn't taking lives unnecessarily. And so we are working to recruit people across the state, and we believe our theory is that 3 people who are dedicated can get any city in Texas to adopt Vision Zero. And so we'll have an event next week on August 10th that's meant as an intro to that effort. And we're trying to recruit anyone who wants to work on their city or their county or their metropolitan planning organization to adopt this safe systems approach. So I might ask if Scott or Kaya or Kara could put the link to that event in the chat, and I hope you all can join us. With that, we should get started on today's topic. So my name is Jay Blazer Crossley. I'm Executive Director of Farm&City, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit that works on Texas public policy across a spectrum of issues, basically land, urban planning, transportation, sustainability, and equity issues. And so, and this is our policy hacking event, happens once a month. We do like to allow for, to some extent, we have a philosophy of open iterative research and policy hacking. And so we hope these events can stir discussion. And I think the presentations we'll give today, it might be best to go through them and then have discussion. Except for mine, my presentation, I don't care if people want to interrupt me in the middle of it. But some of the other models that people will be presenting, it might make more sense to let them get through the whole thing. So today we're talking about equitable transit-oriented development for the Austin region and the city of Austin. And we believe every Texas metro region needs to have equitable transit-oriented development strategies. Where Texas is growing from 26 to 50 million people. And we think this kind of strategy is crucial to be able to grow with sort of shared prosperity, with climate responsibility, with affordability, with people to have options to live the way they want to live. And so we're exploring this through a variety of lenses. And we're going to have a series of presentations. And so I think we're going to actually start off with one of our summer interns. Niall Stewart will be returning for her final year at the UT Urban Planning Program and has been working with us on equitable transit-oriented development all summer. And she's going to provide an intro to the discussion. So with that, I pass it over to you, Niall.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so today I'm going to introduce eTOD initiatives through Farm&City reports and then do just like a brief recap over what's currently happening in Austin. So our first report is the Growing Murder Report, and it was written in 2018, and it's broken up into like benefits of density, displacement, and then actually like what eTOD is. So first off, density is an important prereq for a city to operate functionally. A dense metropolitan area means a walkable and accessible urban environment. This gives Texans more freedom for more opportunities, such as like schools, jobs, recreational facilities, and things like that. It's also great for the environment. It just has a lot of benefits. Dense cities have a lot of benefits. And to support this lifestyle, a connected public transit system is vital. Just like density is a sign of growth, as is displacement. In the past, urban planning deliberately upheld systematic segregation, but it's important now more than ever that we address these past grievances and make sure that we're implementing equity within our future policies. However, inequity within Austin is still a reality, and displacement is real. As the city of Austin grows, marginalized communities are the most affected, and steps must be taken to provide affordable and location-efficient housing for everyone in Austin. Both of these topics bring us to discuss equitable transit-oriented development, or eTOD. As some of you may already know, eTOD operates as a suite of policies intended to ensure that people of all demographics and income levels and things such as that are provided with access to walkable and dense cities equipped with affordable housing and efficient transportation. And Farm&City thinks that's important to implement eTOD into our Austin regional planning for a better future. Our next report was written 3 years ago, and it's kind of just recommendations that Farm&City had for eTOD in Austin. And like some of them have come to fruition. So our first rec was to fund equitable growth strategies, and it was modeled after the city of Portland. Farm&City believes that a process should be launched to study the growth around like the orange and blue lines, so we can like identify spots for affordable housing and identify ways to reduce barriers from affordable housing being developed. Another rec was to create like a city commission, and so the commission would solely be dedicated to leading like eTOD strategies, such as like rewriting the land code, working with Project Connect and local area planning. There would be short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. a long-term goal would be like regional transportation plans and things such as that. So it's just an entire commission dedicated solely to eTOD. Our last recommendation was to create and fund the equitable ATX fund, which would just be like a major TOD fund. And it would just help design a system of equity and sustainability and bring together affordable housing within walking distance of transit. Now we're going to discuss kind of what Austin has done with eTOD. So the first thing was in 2006. So when the red line was funded by a vote, the city of Austin adapted its first TOD ordinance, and it led to TOD zoning for 3 stations so far. The early 2006 model was just like a guidebook to help understand TOD and kind of define what Austin's mission was. Fast forward to 2021, and Austin City Council passed the eTOD ordinance. In it, the city manager is kind of mandated to participate in the eTOD study and community engagement efforts. They also are tasked with like developing and publishing a policy plan and creating a 2022 budget. They identified 2 phases. So the first phase would just be figuring out what spots would be good TOD district locations, and then phase 2 is like developing a station area planning around those district locations. Next, we have Project Connect. So Project Connect's vision was kind of like an overall transit plan that will create a more equitable and livable city and provide people with you know, access to jobs, education, healthcare, and just overall new opportunities. The end goal for Project Connect is to improve the orange, blue, gold, green, and Metro Rapid lines within the Austin Metro so that Austinites can have access to all parts of the metropolitan area. So this one is still like in the works. So there's a proposed $300 million anti-displacement eTOD fund, and Project Connect is expected to fund at least 300 million. It's kind of still being proposed on what it will entail, but maybe like to buy land for reserved for affordable housing, or like the equity tool that they're trying to develop, which is like a system that will make sure that anti-displacement strategies are being made equitably. Farm&City kind of recommends that a comprehensive, like well-rounded way to use the fund would be like, I think like making sure it's distributed evenly to all parts. Next, we have Code Next. It's an initiative to revise the land development code in Austin and make it up to standard according to Austin residents, businesses, and institutions. The process was stalled after a lawsuit 2 years ago, but modernizing the land development code remains crucial for Austin affordability. And as you can see with the map, this is like the existing zoning and then proposed zoning for what Code Next wants to do, and just kind of keep it up par with like Austin growing. So our last thing is the Austin Transit Partnership, and that's kind of one of the recommendations that came to fruition with the our earlier report. So we wanted the city to create a city commission, but in 2020, ATP already kind of, I mean, the city of Austin already went through with that, and they created ATP, which is Austin Transit Partnership. And it's an independent entity meant to guide Project Connect and address concerns for the transit system and its efficiency and equity. So that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Niall. I guess before we move on, any quick questions or comments on the intro section? I don't know if I see anybody hands raised. So next, I'll ask Nafisa Iskandar, who's another summer intern for Farm&City, who's actually just graduated from the UT Community and Regional Planning graduate program. And she's going to explain the work we've done to envision multiple future growth scenarios for the Austin region.
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Jay, for the introduction. I will start to share my screen. Can you all see my screen and hear me clearly? Okay,
Yes.
so I will start. So I will talk about alternative regional growth forecast. So it is part of like what we propose about equitable transit-oriented development in Austin. So we think that it is imperative for us to start like thinking about how we smoothen and or fasten the process of the adoption of equitable transit-oriented development. And one way to do it is to talk about the alternative regional growth forecast because um, previous work of Farm&City has found that the official forecast for the regional growth issued by Campo is not equitable, it's not sustainable. So that's why we want to propose like the alternative for it. So let's get started. So we think that it is critical for us to demand Campo for employing for using more equitable and sustainable regional growth forecasts because it has a significant role in terms of shaping the future of Austin region. So first of all, it is the basic element for the regional travel demand model, which dictate our commuting or driving pattern, but also like in broader sense, it will define our transportation system network. So the way travel demand model made by Campo, but also together with TextDot, unfortunately still prioritizing the speed and reduce the cognition effort, reduce the cognition, but like over like the safety or reducing the fatalities in the road on the road. So we think that the forecast will, in the longer term will impact the safety and the health of the community, the quality of life in the region, and the economic competitiveness of us in the region. So and other things also, it is the basic consideration for federal funding applications such as Project Connect and Austin, but also it is used in many related transportation related studies such as travel impact analysis for school district. And since this forecast is used by travel demand model that adopted by local entities, and local entities assume mostly that the assumed growth will need to be accommodated by increasing the roadway capacity or freeway capacity. That's why this forecast also heavily influenced the local government debt situation. And we found that from the 2010 up to 2019 population density and the housing cost data in Austin, there is a positive correlation between increasing population density that will improve the affordability of the region. And talking specifically about Campo regional growth forecast, Campo basically issues this official forecast for 6 counties surrounding Austin area, including Bastrop, Burnett, Caldwell, Hayes, Travis, and Williamson County. And for this specific version, 2014 45, it uses 2015 as the baseline year and uses transportation analysis zone as their geographical unit analysis. But we found some deficiency of this approach. It includes like it only provides one single forecast, so it doesn't entertain the possibility for the region to have like a low growth or moderate growth or even high growth. So it limits like the ability for us to do like some scenario planning in the region. And it also has limited influence on the magnitude of actual future regional population and employment, but it steers the need for transportation investment in the region. This best is illustrated in this graph, blue graph. I found it from the previous review of 2040 regional growth forecast by Marshall. And basically, with this forecast, there will be certain region with certain growth, and this region will be modeled to have a cognition, and local authorities will address this cognition issue by um, conducting transportation investment in this area, but it is also likely that without the transportation investment, that the growth will not happen in this specific region. So it is more like a forecast that use like a self fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. And in other words, this forecast also like induce the travel demand in the region. And furthermore, the distribution of population that and employment that forecasted in this report is also concentrated in the fringe area of the region, uh, not concentrated in the employment center. We saw a lot of TAZ, transportation analysis zone, that actually have high employment numbers in urban core. In 2015, actually losing jobs in 2045. And lastly, it lack of accountability, because although this demographic data is being fed to um, the simulation like modeling application called Urban Sim, but like later after it's done, the simulation is done, like local government and the campo itself can adjust the final forecast based on what they like. And in this 2045, Williamson County make a significant adjustment for their forecast. And this is the map of a population density of 2015 in Austin. So we can see that the sprawling pattern of development already starting, but not that much. And we can see that higher population are actually living in suburban and rural area rather than the urban areas. We use this spectrum color from yellow to dark brown to highlight the different population density, and the yellow represent the rural areas, and the bright orange represent the suburban area, and everything beyond the population density of 3,800 it constitute as urban areas. And here we can see like the significant difference of population density across the region, and we can see also like significant changes for population. Almost 70% of the population in the official forecast will be living in suburban and rural areas, whereas only less than 30% will be living in urban areas. We can see also like the highest density tasks not only located in the urban core, but also like located in the northern part of the region, particularly in Williamson County. So this scenario comes with implication. We can see that it is obvious. It is encouraging sprawl development. So everything that with sprawl development will prevail in Austin if we still only acknowledge this growth, including like higher vehicle miles traveled, emission, congestion, infrastructure budget, transportation costs, and essentially it reduced the affordability of the region. And we found that not only the population predominantly living in the non-urban areas, but also jobs more concentrated in non-urban areas. And we can see that more than 300,000 square miles open space and rural area will be converted into suburban or urban areas. And with this forecast, it is likely that it underestimates the growth in urban core, but overestimate growth in suburban and rural counties. And that's why we propose the alternative growth scenario. So this is more like a thought exercise, not basically I'm sorry about that, advanced modeling, but it is using like a simple calculation and with the assumption that the total regional growth will be the same, the population and the job will be the same as the official forecast, but we use different distribution methods for the allocating the housing and jobs geographically across the region. And the first model that we develop is everywhere grows the same model. So basically, it is only assuming that there will be one single growth rate for each population and job in every task based on the ratio of the 2045 forecast to the 2015 data. And second model is equitable growth model based on the equitable transit-oriented development principle. So I should call out Jay and also Ruben for developing this model. They have been doing this since like last year, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, we divide it into the region. We divide the region into 4 zones. The first one is within the half of mile, at least one light rail stop. And then the second one within half of mile of at least one BRT stop and has density more than 4 people per acre. And the third one is the task that actually having at least 4 people per acre, and the rest of the tasks that not comply with this criteria, we group it together as one. And we expect not much growth will happen in this region, in this part. And we use Phuket Sound Regional Council recommendation for target of the activity unit. Activity units mean just the sum of the residents plus job per acre. So it is differs from each of the zone. The light rail is the highest one, will be 56 residents plus job per acre, and the BRT 132, and the next zone will be 16, and the last will be 0.5. So we calculate this ratio for the target activity unit to the existing data, the 2015, and we adjust this ratio proportionally to not exceed the total camp of forecast. And this is the result of our first model, everywhere grows the same model. So it is still, we can see some of area that having sprawling pattern, but we don't see a huge disparity between population that living in suburban and rural residents compared to the urban area. Although more than 50% people still living in the non-urban areas. And we can see more tasks that actually having high density cluster more tightly to the urban core of Austin compared to the official forecast. And the implication for this scenario is not that different from the official forecast because it is still using the sprawl development method, but the disparity between job and population still smaller than official forecast, and the conversion of open space and rural areas is about only 50%, not like more than 300 square miles as the official forecast. And lastly, about the equitable growth scenario 1, so we can see like less sprawl is happening. So this is more like compact development pattern, and we can see more urban residents living actually in urban areas. So this is good. This is the model that we want to use in the future. So the implication of this equitable growth scenario, because it is promoting compact development, so it is producing less VMT supposed to be, and then reduce the emission, decrease the transportation costs, also the infrastructure budget, and may improve the affordability of the region. This type of development also encourage development in proximity to transit stops as promoted by eTOD. And it avoid the conversion of almost 80% of open space and rural area as big as nearly 300,000 square miles. And lastly, it promotes dense walkable urban areas and improve access to opportunity and health condition and enhance quality of life. So that's all I have. I will hand it to Ruben to talk more about this implication of alternative growth scenario in the transit readership.
Okay. So this is what I decided to look at was the impact of these alternate growth forecasts on predicted Project Connect ridership Next slide. There we go. The way Project Connect ridership estimates were done was using the Federal Transportation Administration STOPS ridership estimation software. The use of this software by funding applicants is not exactly required, but it's strongly suggested. So everybody who applies for FTA funding tries to use it. The software was designed to reduce the variability in the way different applicants were providing ridership estimates, and they tried to leave as little wiggle room as possible. So in terms of predicting future growth in an area, they required that you take as input the most recent local metropolitan planning organization forecast, and that happened to be Campo 2045. I note that this forecast is obviously wrong because it doesn't predict any population or jobs growth due to Project Connect itself. It just presumes that Project Connect wasn't going to happen, but they really didn't have any choice because the voters had not yet approved Project Connect when the forecast was released. Okay, so anyway, what happens to keep in mind the results of these alternative models are the same total population and jobs growth as the Campo original model. We aren't predicting more people, we aren't predicting more jobs. We're just predicting that they go to different places. So next slide, please. So the original Campo, the original forecast for Project Connect, the one that was put before the voters and will presumably be in the FTA applications, was around 250,000 boardings per day. Okay, these are per weekday. When we substituted in the everywhere grows by the same percentage, oops, go back one slide, there we go. When we substituted in the everywhere grows by the same percentage model, the predicted ridership grew to 455,000. When we went to the eTOD model with the 4 different types of areas, ridership jumped to 596,000, 137% increase. And this is all without any additional expenditure on Project Connect. It's without any additional equipment. Might be some additional operating costs from having to run more trains and buses to carry all these people. But it is the jump in ridership or the increase in ridership is all due to predicting that density is going to end up in different places than the original Campo model. So that's a little bit of evidence that these kind of models have a big effect. I guess, Jay, you're next. Oh, yes, one more slide. The reminder slide for Jay.
Yeah, thank you, Reuven and Nafisa. And just one final slide to make a point is that we actually made these scenarios available to the Texas A&M Transportation Institute team that developed a report for TxDOT Austin analyzing the I-35 freeway. And that report is supposed to be published on Tuesday as part of the new public input process on I-35. And we haven't seen it, but we did at the beginning. We met with the TTI team and gave them these scenarios. And so we hope that everyone will get to see a report that actually analyzes travel demand models on I-35 given these different scenarios. And so if TxDOT allows this to see the light of day, it'll be a huge shift. And with the idea that TxDOT would entertain the idea that our models that we've been using so long might not be right, and the future might be different. And we get to the people of the Austin region will get to understand better what the potential outcomes might be on traffic and travel given that scenario. So it's pretty exciting, but we'll see if we get to see that next Tuesday. With that, we're very excited to have our friends join us from Colorado. Many of you in Austin might know Ben Holland from the Rocky Mountain Institute from doing work in Austin before, but he's been working with a team, including Duncan Kay and others, doing some really interesting work that's very related. And so we asked them if they could come show us what they've been working on, analyzing the impacts of different future land use scenarios in the city of Austin. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you guys in Colorado. Are y'all muted? While y'all figuring that out, there was a question about, has Campo considered changing the forecast now that Project Connect has passed? And there actually was, back when Campo adopted the 2045 forecast, there was significant disagreement then about a bunch of the details. And there was an agreement by the policy board that they should do an update and sooner than they normally do. And then COVID happened. And so I'm not sure what the status of that is, but they're supposed to they are supposed to be doing an update to the forecast sort of off cycle sometime, this year or next. So we'll see.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it wasn't working before, but we just found an alternative approach. But basically, so I just wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to talk to you all. Saw some familiar names on the participant list and familiar faces. As Jade mentioned, we, RMI had a project in Austin. We actually worked directly with the city and some stakeholders there for about 3 years, 2015, 2018. And much of that work was really focused around sort of innovative mobility solutions, if you will. As an environmental nonprofit, transportation is a big part of our organization. At that time, we were really sort of focused on vehicle electrification, mobility as a service, and those other kind of innovative mobility business models, if you will. However, after spending some time in Austin, we really connected with folks like Jay and Congress for the New Urbanism, a lot of planners in Austin and sort of the urbanist community at large. And it was truly a very formative experience for us. So coming out of Austin, came back to Colorado, and our vision is really for decarbonizing the transportation sector. Still has a very strong focus on vehicle electrification, but an equal focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled or improving access to alternatives, getting people out of cars, improving the transit system as well. And within that goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled, we're really sort of honing in on land use reform and infill development and sort of urban design solutions that will enable more walkable, bikeable, safe environments, and sort of a more equitable approach for decarbonizing the transportation system. So the slides that we're going to show you here in a minute are I should caveat this and say they're preliminary. We've been vetting them with Jay and his team, and are eager to kind of get your feedback based on your knowledge of Austin. We will be publishing this along with the case studies of Charlotte and Denver as well, and a report in October. So definitely looking forward to getting your feedback. But with that, I'll just kick it over to Duncan.
Great, thank you. Let me go ahead and, can you see the slides all right? All right, great.
Yes.
So I would like to start by saying we've been using the program Urban Footprint to design these scenarios and perform these thought experiments on different land use scenarios within Austin. The nice thing about Urban Footprint is you're allowed to bypass any regulatory and political restrictions that are in place in order to envision and paint indiscriminately within city boundaries. So to begin, we wanted to answer the question, what exactly exists on the ground in Austin? So to do this, we wanted to have a full understanding of what the development patterns are. So we ran just a quick analysis here to produce these numbers that you see on the screen, which are the detached single family dwellings, which exist on the ground today in Austin, which are roughly 80% of all parcels, a little more than 25% of the land mass. 60% of the residents in the city of Austin currently reside in a detached single-family home. And all of this equates to the current VMT per capita for city residents, which is roughly 6,600 miles a year. Now, the regional estimates are roughly 9,000 a year. So just keep in context that we will be just doing the analysis that we ran for this project are relegated to the city boundaries, and we're working on doing a more regional look at Austin. So the next question we wanted to answer was, what is the existing capacity within Austin? If you were to take all your detached single-family homes or the parcels they sit upon and upzone them, what could Austin accommodate with it in terms of residents? And so here's the methodology we followed. I will share the slides with Jay later on. So if anyone's curious about the methodology, I'll let you guys dive into that. But to save on time, I'll skip over and show you guys the takeaways and data. So what we did was we isolated all the detached single-family parcels and painted them into 3 different density scenarios. One being a duplex, which is shown as D1, D2 is a quadplex, and D3 is a multiplex. So if you were to do these paintings in urban footprint, these are the results you get. So the population that the city of Austin can accommodate within those parcels and within this existing city boundaries is pretty extraordinary. If you were to upzone all this detached single-family homes today and rebuild them as a multiplex, you could hypothetically accommodate nearly 5.2 million city residents, which far exceeds both the eTOD growth, estimates and as well as the Campo growth estimates. But what we wanted to show too is if you were to upzone these parcels without changing any of the existing amenities or existing like the access to various secondary trips, such as like schools, parks, and that sort of thing, the walkability scores for the city get significantly worse. So for instance, on the bottom left, you see custom POI number 1, which are supermarkets within the city. Existing right now, 43.7% of the city lives within a mile of a supermarket. But if you were to upzone all the parcels to be a multiplex, that number drops drastically down to less than 30%. So the following slide is a food desert analysis of Austin, which is, as you can see here, is a heat map. The orange dots signify or are shown to show where existing supermarket exists. And then the pink circles around them, the pink borders, that represents a half-mile walking distance, because that's what we believe was potentially a good proxy for a walkable distance to a supermarket. And how that shook out was if you were to reduce the walking distance to a 10-minute walk or half a mile to a supermarket, as the city exists today, only 28% of the residents live within a half mile of a supermarket. If you were to upzone all the parcels to accommodate a multiplex, that number drops down to 17% if new supermarkets aren't built to fill the market in those areas. So that's this one thing we wanted to point out. So the next thing we wanted to do was do a strategic upzoning of detached single-family homes. And the way we did that was we focused upon roads that were designated as collector roads. And these roads are ones in which they connect directly to an arterial. So what we did was we isolated all the detached single-family homes that are adjacent or sit on a collector road in the first scenario and painted them all as a multiplex. In the second scenario that we'll show here, we narrowed down the number of parcels painted to try to simulate what we believed was a good potential uptake if the parcels were rezoned. And the 2 filters we threw on to reduce that number were year built and improvement to land value ratio. An improvement to land value ratio basically just tells you whether or not the land is more valuable than the building that sits upon it. So you can think of it like a good example is a used tire shop sitting on, like on a Burnett or something like that within Austin that could definitely be redeveloped into something that's a little more useful to the city. So this is what those two scenarios look like. So on the left, you have the more aggressive upzoning and repainting. So currently 22,500 of the 174,000 detached single family homes sit on a collector road. And if you put on those filters, you reduce that number down to 8,000. So these are the two scenarios we played with, and the following slide shows the metrics. So the top left shows the VMT per capita for the various scenarios that we just presented to you just a second ago. So if you were to upzone collector roads and aggressively rebuild them to be a multiplex, you can reduce VMT per capita throughout the entire city by 11%. And if you take the less aggressive version, that number is still pretty significant at 8%. And what we want to also point out is that while we're only painting a modest number of parcels within both these scenarios, you can accommodate a large amount of population growth within just the single family parcels that are repainted along collector roads. Just showing the value, how valuable upzoning, like strategically upzoning is. So I want to keep moving along just to save on time. So following the upzoning, we wanted to create a TOD style scenario for the city of Austin. And we had to build this around existing transit just because Project Connect isn't inputted into the urban footprint system as of yet. So there's going to be some future scenarios that we're going to be building around Project Connect once we get the GTFS files input into the system. But for now, we built some TODs around the existing transit. So we were aggressive with our qualifications for what a high quality transit stop were. So within Austin, we decided to say all light rail and rail stations within the city would qualify as a high quality transit stop. And then we also said any bus fit better than 15-minute bus headway would also qualify as a high quality transit stop. Though we did say people are more likely to walk a longer distance to a rail station. So what we did is around each rail station, we built a 10-minute walk time buffer around that rail station. And then around the bus stops, we built a quarter-mile or 5-minute walk time buffer around those stops. So the next slide will show you exactly what that looks like. So here you can see what qualified as a TOD zone. On the left, you can see the more aggressive scenario. Again, we applied the same filters as last time. However, we decided to paint different parcels. So we decided in these scenarios to paint commercial centers, which are like your typical strip mall, big box store with a large parking lot. We did light industrial and warehouses. So those were pretty common along the northern stretches of Burnett and down South Congress and as well as South Lamar. And we also looked at vacant parcels. So on the left, you can see with our more aggressive scenario, only 4,600 parcels fit the bill for our, that met the criteria we established. And when we isolated those parcels, we decided to paint them as a low-rise mixed-use building. So we're trying to both accommodate population, but also new amenities, new retail, new office space. So we can also try to project some job growth as well at the TOD scenarios.
And that's an average of 4 stories, basically.
That's an average of 4 stories, yeah, 4 to 5. So it's like a stick-built podium. So you have you have your retail on the bottom with about 3 to 4 stories of apartments on top. And then after we threw on the filters, same as last time. So we decided to throw the year built filters on. So we had any building that was built between 1930 and 2000, as well as had an improvement to land value ratio of less than 1. And that reduced the number by 3,000 parcels down to 1,500. But with all that into account, the data was pretty staggering, to say the least. Both scenarios created significant reductions in VMT per capita, despite only modest paintings of existing parcels. So if you were to say paint in the more aggressive scenario, paint those 4,500 parcels, you can have a better than 20% reduction in VMT per capita throughout the whole city, while accommodating nearly double the population, nearly doubling the population, excuse me. And just to point how staggering that is, we only painted 2% of all parcels within Austin, and we're able to get a better than 20% reduction in VMT. But we decided that one TOD scenario wasn't enough, and we decided to create a second. This one was an aggressive transition zoning scenario where we looked at, again, TODs, but then we decided to try to make a buffer zone between the neighborhoods that were adjacent to these TOD zones. So we created an additional, what we called we're calling a transition zone and a TOD zone, and created two scenarios similar to the ones before, where we, within the TOD zone, we focus on those commercial centers, vacant lots, warehouses, industrial. And then within that transition zone, we focused upon the detached single family homes that existed there. And within that transition zone, we allowed the upzoning to be to a quadplex. So the next set of pictures here that you see is what that looked like. So on the left, we have our aggressive TOD with transition zoning scenario, which painted nearly a quarter of all parcels in the city. And what you see is in light blue, that would be the TOD zone. So the parcels that fit the bill, fit the criteria there. And then the pink are the residential parcels that fit the upzoning, transition zoning criteria. And on the right, we again applied those same filters and were able to reduce the number nearly in half to try to simulate what a possible uptake could be, even though this doesn't account for market forces. But the data again was pretty staggering. In the more aggressive transition zoning example, if you were to paint those 57,000 parcels to be low-rise mixed use and quadplexes, you reduce VMT throughout the whole city by 28% while increasing population by 1.2 million. And then the second scenario, we were able to reduce it by nearly 20% while increasing population by nearly 500,000 or 470,000. So what we're trying to show with these, I think the key takeaways we had with these TOD scenarios was, it only really takes a modest amount of change within the city to make a significant impact in VMT. Especially if it's focused in the right area, it can have a very significant impact. I think what we also want to point out is, living in a multifamily connected environment can greatly cut on household costs. I'm going to bring it back a slide. And if you look at the very bottom data graph there, it shows in the base scenario, the average Austonian at the moment who lives in the city pays roughly $13,000 a year on auto and utility costs. If you were to change the zoning regime and favor a TOD style developments with other multifamily developments around the transition zoning, you can have a nearly, I think it's a 45% reduction in annual household costs per capita, or household per household, excuse me. So those are some pretty significant numbers that we got. Then moving on to our last two scenarios, in concert with some of the growth projections from both Campo and eTOD, we decided to try to create a couple of scenarios that were to build out a 2045 growth estimate for Campo, which was roughly 1.5 million city residents, and then also an eTOD city build out, which was roughly 2.6 million residents. For the Campo build out, we started kind of nitpicky. We started with analyzing the existing neighborhoods that we found to be under construction around the urban fringe areas, and decided to complete that construction. And then in constants, like areas that were like Cantera, the northeast part of the city, and Thaxton Place, at least in urban footprint, they showed those areas to be still under construction. So we finished that construction. And then second, we took areas that we believe that at least appeared to be, primed for a future subdivision. These were like areas in the eastern part of the city, especially southeastern part of the city. We built those out to be a subdivision, and what we did was we took the areas that were considered agricultural land and developed the land as such. And third, we did a very conservative TOD development through the middle of the city along the existing transit lines. Then lastly, we did some very limited infill housing around vacant lots that surround multifamily developments to match the existing adjacent building types. Then in the eTOD, we got a lot more aggressive. We started with developing a similar transition zone scenario that we had before. We threw one filter on top, which was just improvement to land value ratio. So we only looked at parcels that, at least in transition zoning, that had a improvement to land value ratio of less than 1. And second, we decided to go ahead and look at the same collector roads upzoning. And we decided to also throw on the same sort of filter. And then last, we did some infill of existing commercial lots and mixed use lot, or not mixed use, but vacant lots around mixed use development to get the population numbers to match. So this is what the development patterns looked like. And they kind of mimicked what Nafisa showed earlier with the ArcGIS mapping, where with the eTOD, a lot of the development was focused in the urban core area, which is shown on the right. And then on the left, with the Campo, it shows a lot on the urban fringes being developed. So this is, this is just the two hypotheticals at the moment. I think there's a little bit that needs to be done with the methodology, but we got some fairly good numbers. So you can see the population numbers where we attempted to match what the growth estimates would be. The VMT per capita, we were a little disappointed on, and I think that was due to just some of the methodology we used, and we're going to be tightening that up and trying to get those numbers corrected. But I'd like to point out again, the household annual costs are greatly reduced if you follow this denser development regime in the urban core. And I also like to point out the last bullet here, when you do a TOD style development and denser compact development towards urban core, at least urban footprint data shows that transit accessibility is greatly increased, as well as transit ridership. And this sort of development would be great to see. We would love to see this on Project Connect. So just to finish up, our key takeaways are: one, methodology could be improved, but at the moment we're fairly happy with at least where the development's occurring, and think that it's a fairly good proxy, especially when comparing it to Nafisa's ArcGIS maps, for likely development patterns for Campo and hope and what we would like to see in eTOD. It also shows that Austin does possess the capacity to grow in the way that eTOD, like for an eTOD style development, to accommodate the population growth for the region. But I'd like to stop there and field any questions you guys have. And those are the scenarios we've built out so far.
Great, thanks so much. It's amazing stuff, and very happy to see this. Maybe do you guys want to unshare your screen? I don't know if I can kick you off. I have some more follow-up things, but anybody want to ask any questions about all those models or anything else we've discussed? Looks like Curtis Rogers, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Sorry if I missed this, but I was wondering if if the VMT reductions in the scenarios, is that assuming we have our existing parking requirements in Austin, or are you considering possible reforms?
So within urban footprint, you're not able to make those alterations to existing regulations. But you like I was saying before, you're allowed to paint indiscriminately, so it can ignore existing zoning regimes, ignore existing regulations. So we were able to paint parcels that might be like a little small, too small to accommodate a low-rise mixed use. But what we wanted to try to show is the regions in which, or the areas in which a TOD style development pattern would be most effective. But that's a good question. I mean, that'd be great, something great to try to simulate in a future scenario.
At the
Possible.
very least, it'd be good to include some content about that in our report.
Yes.
Which that both, our regional growth scenarios and this work don't actually solve all the problems. Like, these are just thought experiments to show the benefits and perhaps the costs of different futures. But to achieve equitable transit-oriented development for Austin would require a comprehensive suite of policy changes and the market to come along. And so there's to some extent, we're all exploring the possible futures for the Austin region, but there's quite a lot of work to do to figure out if we want to head towards those futures with things like parking requirements and everything. Does somebody have a hand up?
Yeah, Zach.
Okay, Zach. I'm not seeing it.
I was curious how accessible and like tweakable are these models? Something that you could give us as files, or I'm not sure how exactly they'd be shared, and then we could modify and play with ourselves. I'm pretty unfamiliar with the software used and stuff.
I think that would require you guys to receive an urban footprint license, but it's a pretty easy program to get into. And if you guys had recommendations for something else you'd like to see, I'd be definitely happy to build it for you guys in urban footprint.
There's some basic files that can be downloaded and shared, but those are all open source data files that you would be able to find on the Austin Open Data Portal as well. But yeah, they have some restrictions around sharing the analysis, I guess, or the raw data, but we could certainly walk you through it. And if there's anybody on, I think there's somebody on from University of Texas. I would imagine they have a license that they could use, and we could do some kind of walkthrough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to share some further things. And one of them is sort of a thought experiment to kind of extend the thought experiment that you just saw. And I'm just going to show you guys this spreadsheet, but that this first row is the baseline scenario for where Austin is today, and using some of the data we got from Duncan. Today regional vehicle miles traveled per capita in the Austin region is a little over 9,000 miles a year, whereas in the city of Austin it's 6,500. And then we used these numbers that came out of their scenarios for what would happen in Austin. But the point is that if you only are looking at the effect on the city of Austin, you're missing part of the benefit, and that one of the problems with Austin's exclusionary zoning is it doesn't allow people to live in the city. And so when you choose not to allow people to live in the city, they're going to live outside the city, which has a much higher rate of vehicle miles traveled per capita. And so we extrapolated out, sort of using all these numbers, the total regional VMT in all these scenarios. And so if you want to compare the Campo forecast, where the official regional forecast would result in us moving from 18 billion miles driven a year to 45 billion miles driven a year. But that this eTOD scenario could reduce that by almost 6.5 billion miles a year less driven. And a big part of that is that a lot less people having to live this high car use lifestyle, and that people not having to drive so much. And we did play a little bit around with this. That translates to almost 3 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, or CO2 emissions, less a year. that would be achieved by this. And another note is that, as Duncan noted, the eTOD scenario could be tweaked and you could see even more benefits. But and to put a point on that is that in the city of Austin, according to their analysis, the difference between the Campo forecasts and this eTOD scenario is about 800 miles less on average that each of us in the city of Austin would drive. But the regional impact is about almost 1,400 miles less a year on average across the region. And so want to make that little point. And then another point just about our scenarios before we get into a presentation is that we'll have all this in a report, the Farm&City stuff you've seen today. And part of the concept is what are the implications? And so, you know, to achieve the Campo population growth forecast is that the city of Austin between now and 2045 will add about 600,000 people. Whereas our eTOD scenario was that the city should add 1.7 million people. But in a lot of the land development code discussions in Austin, we focused on 10 years. And so this basically, if you want the Campo future, you should expect about 200,000 people to be added to the city of Austin over the next 10 years. And that's somewhat on track. That's what we've been doing lately. Whereas if you want this equitable trans-oriented development scenario, we need to figure out over the next 10 years how to instead have housing for 580,000 people. And so from a land use perspective, we hope that there is reform of Austin's land use system, and through equitable transit-oriented development planning and through other reforms of the land development code, we can have capacity for this many people to be allowed to live within the city of Austin, additional people over the next 10 years. And there's a question, how are you defining equitable in eTOD? And there's to some extent a bunch of important distinctions there. A lot of the discussion of eTOD is if you assume the growth is going to happen around light rail stations, which already in Austin, property values around light rail stations are starting to go up and people are buying land. It's already happening. And the equitable means we need a suite of policies to treat people well and to figure out various things, like the City of Austin Council today discussed a right to return policy and other policy, protection for renters. And you need all kinds of policies like that to treat people well. But that we believe we need to plan for this growth. The region is going to grow and we need to plan for this growth. But the planning should be done in an equitable way, and that engages the people who live there now, people who work there now and go to school there now, in a process to define how that growth can happen. However, this shouldn't be your kind of old school neighborhood planning. And that, there's a city auditor report on the inequity found that the city's process for neighborhood planning was quite inequitable, that there's not diverse involvement, that generally wealthier, whiter people were making these decisions about how we want our neighborhoods to grow. And so the city needs to have a better process that really engages all the people. And like, for example, I think any such planning process should involve statistically valid public opinion polling. And you shouldn't just listen to the people who show up to a meeting at 6 o'clock. You should actually try to reach, all the people. But there's other definitions of equitable, the whole concept that the city limits how many people are allowed to live in the city makes it much more expensive to be in Austin. It is the cause of our rising property values and per capita. And so the regional equity vision is that we believe that most people in the region should have affordable options to live in safe, healthy, walkable neighborhoods connected by transit if they want to. And there's plenty of indications that in most Texas metro regions, about half the people want to live in sprawl and about half the people don't and want to live in walkable transit-oriented neighborhoods. But we don't provide those as much in Texas. And so part of the equity is providing what people want today, and that makes things more affordable. And that might be a good way to jump into my final set of slides, really exploring more of how we get there and what this all means for the people of Austin now. And so one point is we need to look at who is coming. What is this growth for the people of Austin? Sorry, I'm trying to hide the little thing. Our region is expected to grow significantly into the future. Much of that growth is just the people of Austin having babies faster than we're dying. Much of that growth is people moving to Austin from other parts of Texas. And some of that growth is people moving here from other places. But that's not the concept that our growth is somehow because people are attracted here for jobs. It's not really true. That's not the majority of our growth. And most of the growth in the Austin region will be people of color, dramatically led by Hispanic people. And so the idea that the city of Austin currently has policies that do not allow the city to grow at the same rate as the region means these are the people who are being excluded from living in the city of Austin. A big part of our affordability problem, though, is just regionally, we haven't kept up with building housing, and the sort of amount of people competing for each house has been increasing over recent years. And so across our region, that's going to impact affordability, and we're all competing for less houses. But that the city and the region are very different, and that in the city of Austin, 55% of people rent their homes, whereas that's not the case in the rest of the region. And the city's policies have meant that a declining share of the region's growth is happening in the city of Austin. And so we're not keeping up with growth in the city, even though we've, all of us know that there's rapid growth and we all see building all the time, but there's more growth happening out in destroying the rural areas and the open space. And so some of the myths we tried to look at, we did some analysis of like the 3 Austins and broke up the region into urban and suburban and rural. And this is just current data based on the Center for Neighborhoods, Technologies, Housing and Transportation Index. Urban Austin, where about 1/3 of the people of the region live, turns out is the most affordable part of the region. And this is one of the really destructive myths that I think cause a lot of bad decisions in Austin public policy. That there's a myth that you need to like leave the city to be able to afford that, and it's simply not true today. The housing on average is more affordable in the urban part of Austin, and transportation costs are more affordable. And the people who live here have much lower carbon emissions and don't have to drive as much. Suburban Austin is more expensive, both in terms of housing on average and transportation costs, and in terms of our carbon emissions and in terms of other costs like traffic crashes and congestion. And then rural Austin is actually the most expensive part of our region, and people drive the most and have the highest carbon emissions. And so one of the myths is this misunderstanding of just the current dynamics. And there's this whole myth about the suburbanization of poverty. And that myth is based on the chart that you see on the right. It's a percent change analysis kind of myth. And so it is true that Williamson County is experiencing growth of people living in poverty in a way that Williamson County probably has never seen before. And that county is probably not ready for that. However, the vast majority of people living below poverty level in the Austin region live in Travis County, and more people were added living below the poverty level to Travis County than all the other counties combined. And then a key part of understanding Austin is that Austin actually is a renter city, and the majority of people rent, although many of the city's policies are biased towards homeowners. Such as the extraordinary homestead exemption, which is essentially a transfer of wealth from lower income people to higher income people. But the more lower income you are, the much less likely you are to own a home. And so an equitable future for Austin needs to treat people who rent at least the same as people who own. And we need to have policies that make life comfortable and affordable for people who rent as well as homeowners. And this just the final point on the sort of people living in poverty is that the vast majority of people living in poverty or region, 158,000 people in 2017, were living in the city of Austin, because you can't afford to live in Hutto or Manor if you are living in Potter. You can't spend that kind of money on transportation. And the city of Austin is actually on the more affordable end of the region's cities. And in this chart, things to the right are more affordable. And Nafisa had mentioned this, I just want to show it a little. This is just sort of very rough look. But we found that between 2010 and 2019, there appears to be a little bit of relationship between the places that got more dense over that time, saw housing costs change, like go down or not go up as much as the places that didn't. And you could think about a neighborhood like Hyde Park or East Cesar Chavez that are very exclusionary. Those neighborhoods actually lost population during this time, while the cost to live there has gone extraordinarily up, and the amount of people living in poverty in those neighborhoods has basically gone to zero. And another key is that the people of Austin have very different experiences of housing, and that people of color are much more likely to live in multifamily housing. And so the fact that we have policies to, that it's like 85% of the city, you're not allowed to have, there's an apartment ban, and you're not allowed to have multifamily units in most of the city of Austin. Those kind of policies are inequitable on their surface, and we should move towards not having those kind of policies. And a little point, there's the whole California thing. It's simply not true that there are people, if you are a sort of more wealthy person who's able to buy a house, then an influx of Californians might be impacting your home buying experience. But in terms of our population growth, California is not very important and somewhat meaningless. More people move to Travis County from Harris County in Houston than from all of the state of California every year. And the net Californians are a tiny, tiny little part of our growth. And then a final bit about our whole campaign to rethink the way the region does forecasts is part of the problem is our forecasts have been way off. And so this is an analysis of the 2040 forecasts and how they performed versus actual growth in the region between 2010 and 2018. And the Campo forecast dramatically underestimated Travis County growth while overestimating Williamson and Hayes County growth. And this impacts things like TxDOT funding. And the forecasts actually factor in to how much money is headed to which county. And it especially really impacts things like an I-35 travel demand model. And I think, I think it's an important story for everyone to know that Campo staff tried to fix this and tried to use something called Urban Sim to analyze regional growth. And so this is our previous regional growth forecast, the 2041 extended to 2045. And the first draft of the new forecast, this is what the models showed. Huge, I'll go back and forth. But the models, the Urban Sim model, which Campo used for the first time, said that what we had been saying for Williamson County growth was wildly off by 500,000 people. But the Williamson County, because of the inequitable structure of the MPO, actually the people who live in the other 5 counties of the Austin region have more votes per person than the people who live in Travis County. And so the forecasts were just changed by a sort of power struggle. And so the official forecast, they just added the numbers back to Williamson County because they didn't like it. And so this process is no way to plan for a region. And the result of many of these policies is these green bars is the growth in sprawl and the growth outside the city of Austin, which is growing. We're somewhat, one point of Austin that people don't understand is we're much more sprawled on a per capita basis than the other major metros in Texas. It's somewhat hard to live an urban life in Austin compared to Houston. And that's one of the reasons that our affordability crisis goes up, is that there's much more competition for walkable urban places. And it's Austin thinks of itself as a sustainable environmental place, but that Houston and Dallas Fort Worth are providing many times more people with lower carbon lifestyles. And the result of our sprawl and we've planned for sprawl for so much is that we drive more, and the people of Austin actually drive more every day on average than all the other major Texas cities. And at one point is that also means that our traffic deaths are worse than other major Texas cities. Of all the major metros, we're the most dangerous because we drive more and more people die in traffic crashes. And there's another myth that's very persistent that somehow Austin didn't build roads, and this is false. We have more lanes feet per capita than all the other major Texas metros. And a final couple stats. In Code Next version 3, the staff estimates were that we would get about 6,000 affordable units out of the bonus program. And I think a lot of people didn't think about how much money that represented. And so that really would have been $1 billion worth of affordable housing units would have been built if we had passed Code Next at that time as it was proposed. That means that if Code Next had not been paused by a landed gentry veto, we would have seen $250 million worth of affordable units paid for by the private market by now. And just in comparison, the city's made historic investments in the $250 million affordable housing bond and the $300 million eTOD anti-displacement funds. Those would have been about half as much as the effect of passing Code Next. And so that's why we believe we need a comprehensive suite of solutions that can harness the marketplace to provide equitable, affordable housing. And to Curtis's point, one of the things that's ridiculous is our concept of requiring parking. And if you assumed actually the Code Next compromise, which would have moved the city from requiring 2 parking spots per unit down to 1 parking spot per unit, and with the expected amount of development in the region over 10 years, the city would have required $2.6 billion to have been put into parking out of our housing expense. However, because Code Next didn't pass, this number actually is much larger. And there are 0 benefits to parking requirements. And so one of the things we need to do citywide is get rid of parking requirements while we plan for equitable growth around transit stations. So with that, thank you all very much. I see there's some chats. Maybe I'll look at those. Somebody said, what is each dot on the scatter plot? So that scatter plot, and I'm sorry, that was just showing you some initial work. Each dot was I believe is a TAS or it might be a census tract. And so that's how much density has changed, the percent change in density in that tract, and then how much of the average housing cost has changed in that tract. Which one of our advocacy points is whenever people talk about affordability in Austin, they always talk about median housing price, like the price of selling a house. And that's an elite projection. It's a great example of elite projection to think that that's the affordability crisis, because low-income people don't buy houses in general, or 85% of low-income people do not get to experience the ownership of a house. And they're definitely not going to be buying a house at the median value of a sale price. We actually did the calculation once. Only less than 1% of the people of the Austin region are involved in a home buying transaction every year. Whereas a lot of people rent, a lot of people move and rent. And so we think any kind of analysis of affordability always should use either much more sophisticated measures where you can see what it costs to rent, or simply the census has a median housing cost, which combines rental and ownership together. And then Pisa just answered the question. So what do you guys think? As noted, and maybe I should finish. We have some very specific policy recommendations. And one of those is we need planning money. And so that happened right now, council is discussing the budget. And we believe there should be a significant increase in planning for equitable transit-oriented development right now, as soon as possible. We actually suggested it should have happened 2 years ago. And that we think those plans should be done equitably, but they also shouldn't take forever. And that they should be done in a manner such that council will be able to vote on executing those plans and upzoning where appropriate next year. And so we need to get on with it. And then another recommendation is, as mentioned before, we think there should be a comprehensive suite of uses of the $300 million funds. If all of those funds are used for preservation, we believe that would be sort of the least bang for your buck for people, for helping people live affordably. That would be the least benefit if we just use it all for preservation. But we think that it's appropriate for some of it to be preservation with a variety of preservation strategies, but that some of it should be for land banking and providing land. And the city and Cap Metro should be able to make deals with nonprofit affordable housing developers as well as private developers to make mixed income, mixed use developments. And we also, as noted before, propose that the city of Austin needs a TOD fund, like pretty much all other progressive metro regions that have built transit in recent history have TOD funds. And it's a method to get the market to provide the things you want. And so with that, I should stop talking. But anyone else have any thoughts, or should we call it quits at 5:30? Let's say Adam Greenfield, you got your hand raised.
Hi,
maybe.
thanks, Meg. Thanks everyone. Amazing presentations. I just want to share a recent CNU article that talks about the need for Quimby urbanism, which is quality in my backyard, and that often in development we talk about number of units and forget that there are other aspects to affordability and quality of life, such as how the building of a design, the design of a building can connect neighbors to each other, can help neighbors to interact with the street environment around them, how long the building lasts, and who. I just wanted to share that because I think it is important that, it's not just about building anything thoughtlessly, it's about what we build as well as how much. So yeah, thank you for the discussion. It's really educational.
Yeah, and I think that concept is somewhat our old proposal for how the city of Austin should do an Austin style equitable transit oriented development fund, was that we should actually have the people who live in places now help define those funds. And that could be things like sort of what qualities might they want out of development, like that a developer is not allowed to use these funds unless they use green stormwater treatments, or unless they provide daycare, childcare, or various, the idea being that there would be a pot of money that helps build transit-oriented development, but that to qualify, you have to meet the community desires, including significant amount of affordable housing units and things like that. So, well, thank you all. Is there a question?
Sorry, I hope this isn't off the wall, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the Home Depot project that's going in the St. John's area.
Right. I think to start, I actually live like 10 blocks from there, and it'll be much better for, I think, the people of the neighborhood to have that project than what is there now. And adding a real significant amount of affordable units and just units, I think will be terrific. And various community support amenities and various things that are included in that project. It appears the dialogue in the public, and if you look at the decision-making matrix, it sort of appears the decision-making matrix was the city decided to take the offer that paid the city the most money or saved the city the most money, while there were other offers that would have provided a lot more benefits, especially housing. And so it is somewhat amazing that there was a different proposal that had twice as much affordable units, and I think also twice as much market units, but it didn't score well. And so that being said, I think it'll be a significant improvement. There's a whole problem of freeways. Freeways are terribly unhealthy places. And so I hope the design put some real good thought into the dangers of particulate matter. And so adding density along freeways needs to be done carefully and that kind of thing. So I think that, I think there was another big development just announced on MOPAC. And so I hope the city can figure, and basically children within 1,000 feet of a freeway have very serious negative impacts, and which you can mitigate those impacts actually just with healthy trees. And so, so there's my thought. I think I'm very grateful that Councilmember Kassar and everyone, I think, built a real great community-driven project there. But you always wish there could be more. Well, thank you all so much for being here. And I guess they already jumped off, but I'm very grateful for Rocky Mountain Institute for the work they're doing and for joining us today. And thanks so much to all our summer interns who have been amazing all summer. But for today, very much to Nafisa and Niall for sharing this work with you and this work they did all summer. We do plan to publish a report in sometime by the end of the month, basically with everything we presented today all put together in a report. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a great day. Oh, and well, final thought. We were going to have 2 council members and they had a special called meeting, so they couldn't come. So we were planning for next month to do a second eTOD event with a couple of council members. And so I'll see y'all then. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.